All right, and I am still recording. Okay, so we're talking about dynamics, and dynamics have to do with forces that we can apply to objects. And the way that this works is we need to have an object that we apply some sort of dynamic tag to it, and then we have to have some sort of thing that it can essentially collide with. So you typically have an object and a collider that work back and forth. So cube, for example, if we go to tags and we do simulation tags, if I make this a rigid body, okay, that is going to give it some of those types of dynamics. So if I hit play, this is going to fall down into space. All right, so suddenly this has gravity that's being applied to it, and it knows it needs to fall down negative along the y. Okay, now the floor, or this plane that I have here, I need to assign some sort of tag to it as well, or the dynamics won't work. So on the plane, go to tags, simulation tags, and this, I'm going to call it a collider body. All right. If I added a rigid body and the two met, they would bounce off of one another, but the rigid body is also going to fall to the ground, right? So we want something that's going to stay static and kind of still. The collider body is the thing for that. So now if I hit play, go back to 0, then the cube should fall and land on the plane, all right? And under the rigid body, if I click on the tag in the object manager, then I have some things that I can play around with. The collision, for example, right now the bounce is only 5%. But if I ramp that up to, let's say, 60%, we're going to see something different, right? So notice what happens. It really bounces in the scene. It even flips over. So that is something that you can definitely adjust and play with, is how much bounce you have. If it's 200, then it's going to bounce off the scene, right? It's like super putty or something like that. Right, 100, it's still going to be pretty active. It's going to bounce around a few times. It's really too much, you know. So, you know, you have to play around with what parameters are going to work best for you. You know, let's try 30. So 30 works pretty good. That seems to be more realistic for what we do. Okay, so the cool thing about this is, you know, you can make adjustments to things as you go. So the higher up you place an object, you know, the more bounce it's going to have. Okay, so that's going to be something. Also, if we rotate it slightly and it drops and hits a corner, right, that's going to be something a little bit different as well. So let's see what that does. Okay, definitely a different sort of spin. So the cool thing is you can make these subtle changes to your project, and they will, you know, ultimately play out and affect the way that we see fit. So now, if we have another object in the scene, so let's just take a sphere, for example, bring this down. Let's make the more segments so it looks more rounded. Okay, for this object, what I want to do is make sure it's just directly above the plane. The thing of it is, if it's not a little bit above, oftentimes it can just shoot off into space. So I'm just going to take a look at this really closely, and it's just hovering right above. All right. So on the sphere now, again, I will add a simulation tag and a rigid body. Okay. And let's see what happens here. So cube falls down, hits the sphere, and that spills off. All right. There's a great primary action, kind of secondary action thing happening between these two. So again, you know, dynamics are a great way that you can apply forces, you can interact, you can have different things happen, and it can be really fun to just play around with these different sort of actions and reactions. All right. Now let's get rid of the sphere's rigid body tag, and instead, let's see what happens if we make this a soft body. Okay, so a soft body is going to be something that has more flexibility. So it would be like a water balloon or something like that, right? So the cool thing about the soft body is it's going to deform the mesh accordingly. And so you have to kind of have a balance with soft body dynamics of the amount of polygons versus render time, right? So you imagine you really crank up the polygons in an object, it's going to take a lot more to calculate that structure. So that's one thing to consider when you're working with the soft body. Soft body is definitely going to be a little bit longer render overall. But let's just see what happens. Now we have a soft body tag on here, and let's see what happens. Oh. I'm already getting the spinning rainbow of death here. Yeah, my computer is not happy with this one. All right, we're going to try to pause this. I think I might have crashed something here. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Let's take this sphere. Instead of 72, let's just see about maybe 24. Maybe that'll be better. Let's see if that'll help. There we go. You can see that it just totally squished it. And for some reason, it dropped right through the panel. Okay, so definitely 24 was better. What about 36? Let's see if that's going to be any better. It squishes down, squishes into this thing, and it gets smushed by that. All right. So, you know, again, soft body is going to be a lot more render time. There are things that we can constrain. So let's see the mass, I believe, regional mass. Okay, soft body. So under soft body itself, you have a lot of different things that you can play with. How flexible it is, how elastic it is, how stiff it is. Those sort of things become, you know, things that you can change and alter. So springs, let's see, maybe if we ramp up the springs to like 80%, let's see what that does. Again, this is just something you're going to have to just kind of practice and play with and see what happens. Have some patience. It's definitely like still squishing down, but having a different sort of interaction. Okay. The other thing that's kind of cool is let's consider this. So the cube is dropping down, right? The sphere flattens way too soon. Like it automatically goes flat, which I don't really care for. So what we can do with the dynamic tags, if you click on, all right, dynamics. Okay, so we have this button called enable, right? So what we can do is if we have our soft body tag highlighted, if we go to auto keyframes, let's check this enabled off. Pop in a keyframe here, right? Then let's see where the cube actually hits. It looks like it hits right about here. Yep, okay, so there, then we can turn the keyframe on, all right? So let's see what happens now. Play this, it squishes with that thing coming down, which is better, right? So that's the cool thing about dynamics is you can keyframe the enabled and turning it on and off, and that can, you know, create a really great action. Let's say we zoom in here, you can see this a little bit better between an object and its form. So that really looks like it's squishing it down. That's a good action reaction kind of animation form. Okay, so that is dynamics in and of itself. I mean, there are lots of tutorials out there about how to do different dynamic sort of interactions, but I think the best thing to do is to just kind of play around, see about different combinations of objects. Remember that rigid body is going to render a lot faster than the soft body because it's really altering the mesh and doing all kinds of different stuff. But between those different types of things, you can create some really interesting triggers and you know, action kind of reaction forms for your animation.